Welcome back to the Always Better Than Yesterday interview sessions. And today I have a very special guest in Anne-Maartje. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
We were just chatting off air. I wanted to really make sure that I said your name properly. I didn't want to do the British thing of just calling you Anne. I had a guest recently who was from Belgium origin and his name was Alain, but I called him Alan. And I didn't want to make the same mistake again with you today. So welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. Thank you so much. The sun is shining, which is always a pleasure. In the Netherlands, usually we have a lot of rain. So yeah, very good. Thank you.
Beautiful. I would love to know a little bit about the work that you do at the moment.
At the moment, well, so many things. I'm teaching, I'm training, I'm coaching one-on-one, I'm writing. So all these kind of things are going on. Yeah.
That's amazing. Tell us the story and the journey of how you have got to where you are today and some of the experiences that have really shaped your journey.
Yeah, I always love that question because for me, it has been a journey, you could say. I studied the Academy of Arts and it is called Dramatic Expression through Non-Verbal and Physical Behavior. But in essence, you could say you are educated as a teacher and as a director. And in my last year, I was asked to give a presentation on stage presence, like if this was for a business setting. So if you are a CEO and you have to talk about your numbers, how do you do this? How do you engage the audience? And I remember this very vividly because I was talking about nonverbal communication and about eye contact and all these kind of things. And they were used to just look at the paper and just kind of, in themselves have a presentation instead of engaging with the audience. And in that moment, when I was teaching all about this, and the surprise they had, the surprise on their faces, immediately there and then I decided, I think this is my journey. I think this is what I'm going to teach in businesses instead of, going in theatre and making plays or creating plays.
What journey, what path did you take?
What path did I take? What do you mean by with path?
Path, in terms of where did you, that was what you wanted to do. Those are some of the things that you were really curious about, really interested in. Tell me about your education, your early experiences with kind of work and where that really took you.
Yeah, well, the minute I decided to do this, I thought it was really important to, involve in so many training sessions and any education you can get, and reading books, of course, and so psychology training sessions, group dynamics, all these kind of things. So I went to a lot of training sessions, but I also was happy to, luckily, I was very lucky, you could say, that I was able to start in a company that also trained trainers. So I had these 3 or 4 week sessions where you will be molded and they would teach you everything about interaction with groups. And then at one point, that I think I worked there for 5 or 6 years, I decided, I think it's time to do what I think is necessary. I was a bit more bold, and then I started the Behaviour Company. So that was the journey.
That's amazing. What does the Behaviour Company seek to do? Well, how does it help?
Well, what I like about what we talked about in your and also what you put online is that how can you be better than yesterday? How can you grow? How can you develop? All these kind of things. And what we try to do with the Behaviour Company is create, that would be different, but help people to become better, to become aware on like, what do you do now? How do you present yourself? What's your behavior? How do you lead your team? And is that the best you can do? Especially because a lot of people sometimes are not aware of their behavior. And so what we do is we help them to become aware, and we help to give tips, tricks, feedback, ideas on how to improve.
I think a core part of leadership is, before you can lead others, is to be able to lead yourself. And I'd just be curious to know some of the ways in which you think leaders might be able to improve the way that they lead themselves.
By becoming aware, I think that's exactly what you say. Sometimes you can just reflect on them or give them feedback, because sometimes when you're higher up in the organization, you don't get a lot of feedback anymore. You just do what you do and people hopefully listen to you, but sometimes they're just sort of focused on the day-to-day work or those kind of things. And I think it's very important that they take the time to reflect on themselves, but also ask feedback. And sometimes even by taping yourself and become aware of what do I do, how do I interact with others. So those kind of things would be helpful.
You deal a lot with communication, effective communication. That's really important for leaders to have people follow them, I guess. And what is some of the ways that leaders can learn to first and foremost communicate with themselves?
Oh, that's a nice one. I think to be honest and to take time. So of course now it's different because you're in your house and you have a conversation on Zoom, and then it's maybe sometimes it's more difficult to reflect. But usually sometimes when you're driving in a car and you just go back in your mind, like what happened? What just happened there? What did I say? What did the other person say? How did I present myself? What was the setting? All those kind of things. And what always helps for my clients is to talk about the helicopter metaphor. So not just dive into the content, but to zoom out in the situation. And you can do that during this situation if you kind of learned it, and if you're able to do this. But sometimes it's also possible to do this afterwards, or talk about it with people who were present at the meeting. How did I do that? What were your thoughts on how I engaged in this meeting? Those kind of things would be really helpful. And ask feedback from your team. A lot of people don't do that. At least it's my experience. I don't know how you see that. Do you think a lot of people ask feedback?
That's a really good question. I think I've seen examples of people that ask questions for genuinely wanting to improve. I've seen people ask questions to seek validation. And yeah, not enough. I think genuinely, if more people ask great questions, then we can build, I think, trusting teams, because I think some people are scared to do that because there's an assumption of judgment or there's an agenda behind. And I think the more we get used to having those open conversations, asking questions, we can take the good and the gold from that conversation, rather than that conversation in the back of my mind that's saying, what do they really think about me? Do they think I'm good enough?
Yes.
Like, are they doubting me? Do they think I'm, underperforming? And just take the love is what it is. Feedback. I think I heard someone say recently, feedback without care is simply an opinion.
That's a good one. Without care. Care is important also for a leader, because sometimes they just want to get things done. And that's also like an opinion, you could say. I love that. That's a good example.
Yeah. You talked earlier about presence. What in your research, what in your experience creates presence?
Oh, we're going in circles now, because again, I would say awareness. And maybe also care, because if you don't care about being somewhere or interacting with somebody, probably you don't lose out the presence that is helpful. You just show up. But what I see with my clients, if they become aware of what they want to achieve or what they want, or what they want to, as you would say, create a legacy or work with their team, or all those kind of things, then they have this awareness, and if they care, they will show this in their behavior.
I've often said that awareness creates that awareness of how we think, how we feel, will inform the way that we act, which I guess links to behavior. How would you define behavior?
How would I define behavior? Everything. Everything's behavior. A lot of people, when we talk about behavior, they either think it's gestures or nonverbal communication, but I would say behavior is communication. And even if you're sending an email, or if you're not sending an email, you could say that is behavior. So for me, if I teach about behavior, for me, it's everything combined, like maybe it's not the setting, so where you're in your office, how you set your office, but the choices you make on that would be behavior, I could say.
Yeah, and I guess if it's all behavior, it's good behavior and bad behavior, good day, bad day, shadow behaviors.
Yes.
And I guess that's where awareness and the value of feedback really comes in, because you're out there putting these messages and these signals out to the world anyway. And wouldn't it
Yes.
be better to know that?
Yeah, and if you ask for feedback, sometimes you see these, I would even say poor managers, because they don't get feedback, and then they come to us and we try to help them with becoming aware, because they show all this kind of behavior, probably coming from good intent, and they want to interact with their team, but sometimes they forget what is really necessary, or they don't understand what's necessary, or they haven't asked what's necessary. So yeah, that would be helpful if they would ask more feedback and if they would focus on their behavior.
What do you think the toolkit of leadership behavior looks like?
I think there's so many things that you can put in the toolkit. But if I would narrow it down to 3 things, I think you've created this perfectly on your website or not just on your website, but what you talk about as well is looking at yourself. So the reflection on who am I, what do I do? I think it's called leading yourself. That's how you put it, leading yourself. And if that's, so that would be one. The other thing is if you want to be a leader, you're not alone. So you have to engage and interact with others. That means you have to be aware of, you have to be able to observe others. You have to look at others. And then the third one would be, what, as you would say, what is your legacy? And then I would say, what's your purpose? Or what's your goal? What's your intent? Those kind of things. Yeah. And if you say what kind of toolkit would be useful in that for some people, it could be a training or coaching. Some people could be reading a lot of books. It's just to figure out, who am I and what do I need to go for these 3 essential things on leadership.
Yeah, love that. We can't really go far in the world without teams. Like, teams create some of the best things in the world. They're in our organizations. If you're a leader, you're leading people in teams. Talk to me about what group behavior, what positive group behavior looks like.
Let's start with I don't know if you know, if you use this, if you know this, like the acronym of team, like together, everybody achieves more. So for me, that's what it is. And it doesn't mean that you have to be the same, or that you have to do exactly everything, like everything's the same. I think you have to, again, be aware of who are you, who is my teammate, what are the qualities and maybe the pitfalls. And if you know that and you're interacting and you're aware of that, and again, feedback is essential with this. Hey, what you're doing right now is really helpful for our team. Could you please do this more often? And then make it specific what that behavior is. I think then, or this is at least what I see, that teams grow and become better teams if they start giving feedback, which is a bit in the beginning when I'm hired to observe teams or those kind of things. And we start giving each other, or they start giving each other feedback. It's scary because they've never done it before, and oops, am I going to say something negative? But also the positive feedback will help to improve a team. Sometimes people don't even know what makes a good team.
What makes a bad team?
Well, the opposite. Yeah, just being together because you've been put together in a way, and not wanting to interact, not wanting to hear each other out, to listen to each other. I think we've all seen those teams where you see that the people are together, but they're not together at all. They're just there. And then I would say nothing gets done. And sometimes you see these, that it has a history. So something happened in the company and that affected the team. And so the team itself is not a bad team, or as you would say, but the things that happen around them that created this team, because they didn't say it, or it just simmered under the surface, you know, those kind of things. So it doesn't necessarily has to be a bad team forever, or that it was an essential bad team. But yeah, I would say no interaction, that's a bad team. What would you say?
What would I say? I mentality. You know, anyone that puts themselves before the needs of their teammates often does damaging, you know, things, because you're not going to get trusting relationships where there's a sharing of information. You're not going to get collaboration. You're not going to get the support. And this kind of give and take mentality, that if the high performers are taking too much, there creates a reticence and a resistance to the full potential of the group behavior. You and I connected through Joe Navarro, and I read Joe's book, What Everybody Is Saying, and I'm a curious human being. I love to know how people think, how people act, and the reasons why they do what they do. What are you fascinated by?
People in general, I would say. Of course, when you talk about Joe Navarro's work, he has written so many fantastic books, also Louder Than Words. I don't know if you've read that as well. That's usually about nonverbal communication and you know, the presence of people and what we can see about all of that. I also love to look at group dynamics, behavior, and what drives me is the interaction with others. And Joe describes this really well, to understand that what you do has an effect on somebody. And if you want to achieve something as a manager or as a team or as a person even, you have to be aware. So what drives me is to see, like, are you aware? Sometimes even to wake people up, like, do you realize what you're doing and how good this is, because it helps to achieve the goal you have, or the other way around. So I would say interaction, influencing others, those kind of things.
If someone has a curiosity about human behavior, or maybe an intuition about reading signs and body language and the nonverbal communication, how does one develop that craft and talent?
Reading, that would be one. Watching, that would be the other one, of observing. But also to well, not to test it out, because that's a word that sometimes holds this negative connotation, but to check things. So again, interactions. Is it, can I assume that because I see this, can I assume that you're tired today? Or can I assume this? So just to check it, if that's possible. And I think also, if you're really interested in this, you can have these fantastic training sessions or coaching sessions, even one-on-one, like a commercial break. Now, Joe Navarro will be in Amsterdam for 2 whole days. It's going to be an interactive practitioner course. So that is amazing if you're really into reading people and interaction. So that would be helpful.
What do you really want our listeners to hear from you today?
Well, what I hope is, if they listen to these kind of podcasts, that it doesn't matter what it is, but it would be so great if there's a little spark in their mind, like, okay, what do I do? How do I do this? And if they choose to be more reflective, that would be the goal of the day, to create a little bit more awareness.
And it's interesting, you said earlier that awareness, and you felt like you were going in circles, and I think what you're emphasizing is that it's actually a fundamental. It's not, you know, I think a lot of intentional growth can come from awareness, being always better than yesterday. You can't be that intentionally if you don't know where you are right now.
Exactly. And if you know where you are, but you know what kind of behavior you're showing, or what you're doing, only then you can make a conscious choice with help from others, because we can help others to say, oh, you can also choose this kind of behavior, or try out this. So I would say it's always good to have others around you that can help you with new behavior, but you have to be like, oh, I'm doing something different, or I can go out of my comfort zone to do something else.
Yeah, love that. Where do you think your work will take you over the next couple of years?
What I hope is I'm teaching in the Netherlands and abroad, and I really like that. Of course, traveling now is impossible, but I would love to do more of that. So I'm always very fortunate. I feel very fortunate if I can talk about this in different countries, and also to see how people pick up on it, how they kind of, you know, just, I don't know, absorb, that would be the word, absorb the knowledge. Or when I talk about the helicopter technique, they really want to know, like, help me, how can I zoom out? How can I zoom in? How can I hover? Give me these tips and tricks, all those kind of things. So what I hope is that I will get the possibility to do this further and more.
Talk to me about zoom in, zoom out, and hover.
You have to read the article, Ryan. No,
I will share that. I will share it in the show notes.
It's so much. It's, to sum it up, it's summarize it. I mean, it's a technique, and it's called the helicopter metaphor technique. So what you do when you're in a situation, which happens to leaders a lot, you're either in a meeting or in a one-on-one setting, and all of a sudden you feel stuck. You don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. And the helicopter technique can help you to choose different behavior or different choices than you would normally do. So you want to get unstuck. Zooming out would be, if you think about the helicopter, you would lift off and you would look at the situation. You would observe the other person sitting across from you. You would observe yourself. Hey, how am I sitting? Am I too close? Am I maybe frowning? All those kind of things. So that would be hovering. Zooming in would be really looking at one detail, either in content of the story. What does this person say? Why didn't he finish that project? Why did he say Friday instead of Thursday? So that would be zooming in. But also other metaphors, like getting out of the helicopter, which could be if sometimes you're in a setting as a manager or a leader and you feel this is not the right atmosphere for this talk, so just go out or leave the scenery, those kind of things. But they're 10, so I could go through all 10 metaphors.
I will share it with the show notes. What is the top tip you can give leaders that are having to lead like this remotely, where maybe they don't have the benefit of the full situational feel?
You mean in like digital settings? Yeah. Well, first, and this sounds very basic, but it's so essential. You're going to use this as a video, so I can show it. And for the podcast people, they cannot see it, but just making eye contact and interacting in a different way than you would normally do. Sometimes in meetings, you see people being distracted. You know, they will write something down and they will stare at the ceiling. That's I would say a no-go in this digital. You just have to engage, because this is 2D, and I always say we're made for 4D. Now you have 3D, but 4D, as you would go to in a cinema, is touch and smell. And I don't know if you've ever seen a 4D movie, but it's with movement of the chairs and everything. That's what we're lacking in this digital setting. So you have to engage even more. And you can see me using my hands a lot, for instance, and that creates more depth in a way to this conversation. So that is helpful, those kind of things. But also maybe even talking or connecting with your team more than you would normally do. You know, just on the Friday, just call them up. Hey, how are you doing? And I've heard great stories on managers who try to create different settings to get the team together in a different way. For instance, the Friday drink, but not just, hi, this is a Friday drink. But even up to the point where they came up with cocktail recipes, and they would share cocktail recipes, and one person would be creating snacks and sending out a recipe. So in a different engagement.
Yeah, I love that. In the past, I've interviewed many leadership experts that talk about positivity, and I asked the question around, just because you talk about positivity, doesn't mean that you're not ever negative. And I guess being a behavior expert that knows all of the things we could and should do when it comes to effective behavior, what are the downfalls in your own? Do you recognize your own downfalls with your behavior and communication?
With me, yes, yes, I do. Not a pleasant thing to talk about, but definitely, this is sometimes you're so aware you cannot switch it off.
Yeah.
And that makes, even when I'm, with my family or something, you can feel your kind of, as I talked about with the helicopter, I have that with myself. So there are a few things. Sometimes I'm impatient. And I'm like, okay, let's get to this as a leader as well, with my team. It's like, okay, well, let's go to this. And I have this vision how I want it, and I want to go for it. But because I know this, because I hope I'm aware, or I know I'm aware, I realize that I can calm myself down and say, okay, how are we going to do this? Or have this vision. So impatient would be one. But on the other hand, the enthusiasm or the positive side sometimes is also a downfall, because I get so excited on talking about behavior or these kind of things, and then I could start, babbling, those kind of things, which it's nice, not a bad thing you could say. But sometimes when people are more, calm, or they have to think a bit, or they just have they need some self-reflection time, then it could maybe be overwhelming. How about yourself? You have to say something about this, right?
I very much relate to the impatience, and I think for me, I've just got really used to trying to detach judgment, and I think that's kind of what it means to be better than yesterday as well. Is that actually in this moment I might not be being my best, whether that be being needy, being emotional, being impatient, frustrated, and learning not to judge myself for that, but realize actually that I need to go and do something for myself to be better.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just the power of questions. Like, this might sound extreme, but sometimes I just ask myself, what are you doing with your life, mate? Sometimes I'm procrastinating, and I'm in the scroll hole of social media, and sometimes that self-reflection question, what are you doing in your life?
That is some of the examples of the helicopter, just kind of a wake-up call. But I would say without like really negative judgment, because there should also be allowance on, okay, maybe I need this today because I've been working really hard, and yes, I'm going to take 3 hours, which would be very long, but I'm going to maybe like 1 hour just on social media, just to scroll through, stuff. If you are aware of it, you can ask yourself the question, is this helpful for me now? And if the answer is yes, this is good for me, this will make me better because I can relax now, then I would say, go ahead, go for it. But if you say, what are you doing, mate? And you realize, no, this is procrastination, or I actually have to do something I'm dreading, and I'm not doing this, then you have the alertness and awareness, which would be really helpful if a lot of more people would have that. And if they would dare to do it, because, and the opposite, you see the opposite as well, people being too strict and having no allowance for fun. So,
We've talked a little bit about the concept of being better than yesterday. I'm just curious to know what that phrase, always better than yesterday, means to you.
I love that phrase, because this is my goal, I would say. And that's also a bit frustrating, because you always see the possibility to grow. And there's so many fantastic books I want to read, or people I want to talk to, or things I see or hear. So for me, I would say it's the mission as well. Always be better. But if you say like, what have I learned in the past, or what did I pick up on? One of the things was also not to be too strict on, like, if you have this determination, like always be better than yesterday, that's lovely. But if you have this dark, grim, I would have to be better than yesterday, that to me is not very helpful. But to look at it, to look at every day and to see the possibilities and the knowledge you can get with the stuff you can pick up on, even on social media. Yes, that I love that. I really love that.
It's supposed to inspire you, not unburden you, you know, and I think you've articulated that really nicely. So thank you. Let me just say thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and join it with us and the Always Better Than Yesterday community here on Facebook, YouTube, and the podcast. I would love to know how people can connect with you.
They can connect on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I've recently started Facebook. My social media should be a bit improved. One of the things that would be called bad behavior. But so Twitter, LinkedIn, those kind of things. And of course, if they want to read the article, that could be found on Psychology Today.
Amazing. Thank you again. Could you please leave us with a final thought from your good self?
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to quote from, in the Netherlands, you have these books that you give to your family members, and they write in thoughts for the future, so to say. And one of them, I don't, it could be like a funny quote or something, but one I really like, I've always taken with me, was where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for the talk, Ryan.